Specflow tutorial part 2, Specflow requirement and a plugin. In part 1 we have learned about the BoDi. So in this session we are going to learn about what is the requirement for Specflow and how to download a Specflow plugin. So let me start this session. So whenever we talk about the Specflow requirement, we can use different IDs. One is a Visual Studio, a Rider and the VS Code as well. So when we talk about the Visual Studio, so Visual Studio is a recommended IDE for the Specflow. So we can use a Visual Studio 2022 or you can use a Visual Studio 2019 as well. But whenever you are using a Specflow, it is always recommended to use a latest version of the Visual Studio. So you can download a community editions, those are free, and we don't need to use a professional and enterprise editions where we need to provide the license fee as well. So always recommend to use a latest version. The moment I am creating the sessions for you, the Visual Studio 2022 is the latest one. So when we talk about the SDK, so you can use a .NET Framework 4.8 or greater, and you can use a .NET 6 or .NET 7 as well. So we also need to download a Specflow extension in a Visual Studio. So whenever you want to use a Specflow in the Visual Studio, we always need to download a Specflow extension. So let me flip to Visual Studio to understand with an example. Right now on my machine I have this Visual Studio 2022. What I am going to do is I am going to create a new project. So let's select this create a new project, and here I am going to use a NUnit test project. So let this NUnit test project, click on next, and here we can provide the name as a Specflow session and click on next. So when we talk about the framework, we have a different frameworks at this point of time. I have this .NET Framework 4.8 as well as I have a .NET 6.0. So if you want, you can use this .NET Framework, but I am going to use this .NET 6.0, which is having a launch. Now let's go and click on create, and it will create a project which is going to be the NUnit project, and then we are going to check a few things. So Specflow session project is created. So when we talk about a Specflow, if you want to use a Specflow inside this Visual Studio, then you need to download or install another extension, which is going to be the Specflow extension. Go to the extension, select this manage extensions, and here we can check a Specflow, whether the Specflow is available on our machine, or you can say in this Visual Studio. Right now this Specflow for Visual Studio 2022 is not installed, you can say it is not downloaded in this Visual Studio. Then let's do one more thing. We also need to check few things. If we click on this add, here is the add new items, and we can also check we don't have options here. We can create a different feature file. So you can say the Specflow templates are also available if the extension is downloaded here in this Visual Studio. Right now we don't have a Specflow template, so let's cancel this. Select this extensions, manage extensions, and here we can select a Specflow. Select this and click on this download, and it is going to start downloading this particular Specflow extension for this Visual Studio. Here we are getting this message. It is saying your changes will be scheduled. The modification will begin when Microsoft Visual Studio windows are closed. So after downloading this Specflow for a Visual Studio, what we need to do is we need to close this Visual Studio to have the impact of a extension, which is this Specflow extension. Let's close this, close this as well, and we can see the installer has started. It is going to modify the change. Let's click on this modify. It is going to make a change in the Visual Studio Community Edition, which is this 2022, which is present on my machine. Click on close, and we can open a Visual Studio one more time. So let's click on this Visual Studio, select this, and we can see if we commit here inside this extensions, go the manage extensions, and here we can check whether that particular extension installed or not. And it is saying right now we have this particular green check mark. It is saying the extension is already installed. If we go it here in the installs, and if we see it, we have this particular Specflow for a Visual Studio. Right now this is disable and uninstall buttons. It means the Specflow extension is available inside this Visual Studio, and we can start using the functionality of the Visual Studio. So we can start utilizing the functionality of a Specflow. So another thing, we can check it here, go to add new items. So if the Specflow extension is installed, then you will be getting this particular option, and here right now we are getting 3 different options: feature files, configuration, and Specflow hooks. So we are going to learn all these information in the later sessions, but here we can say after downloading that particular extension, inside this manage extension, we can start utilizing the Specflow in the Visual Studio. So that's it in this session.